The first alarm jolted me before the second one even had a chance to blink. It was 2:14 a.m., and the server room at Meridian Technologies was a cold, humming cave beneath the San Diego headquarters. Rows of blinking towers reflected off the polished floor as I slid my badge through the reader, heart already picking up pace. The screen on the nearest console screamed warnings, critical load imbalance. One cluster was seconds away from cascading into a full network failure. I knew what that meant. $20 million in hospital monitoring equipment would go dark, triggering liability penalties and potential lawsuits. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the hum of the fans filling the silence as I rerouted data streams and killed non-essential processes. The room smelled faintly of cold metal and ozone, and the air conditioning roared like an angry wind. I counted in my head 10 seconds. 15. I could almost see the chain reaction waiting to ignite if I hesitated. Come on. Hold for me, I whispered to the machine, the same way some people whisper to pets. I isolated the faulty node, flushed the cache, and brought the backup system online. The red alerts faded to amber, then finally to a calm, solid green. 30 seconds. That was all it took to keep the company from spiraling into an 8-figure disaster. My shoulders sagged as I exhaled, staring at the screen that now looked perfectly innocent, as if nothing had ever been wrong. The next morning, fluorescent lights replaced the server room glow, and Parker Sloan's voice boomed through the all-hands meeting. Thanks to the quick action of our operations leadership team, Meridian avoided a major disruption overnight. Their dedication keeps us ahead in healthcare analytics. A polite round of applause followed. I stood in the back, coffee in hand, invisible as ever. Nobody glanced at me, not even once. Lyle Conrad, the CFO, nodded along like he'd personally typed the commands that saved us. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. My fingers tightened around the paper cup until it crumpled slightly. I forced my voice to a whisper only I could hear. One day, they'll know who kept the lights on. I slipped out of the room before the applause ended, the cold echo of the server room still in my bones. Already thinking of the presentation I would give that afternoon, the one that might finally change everything. The boardroom smelled faintly of coffee and the lingering perfume of the executives who had just returned from their extended lunch. My presentation materials were neatly stacked, slides queued on the wall screen. 8 years of quiet labor had brought me here. To this moment, I cleared my throat. I've completed the prototype for our real-time predictive analytics system. With full deployment, it can reduce operational costs by 70%, saving the company approximately $50 million annually. The words hung in the air for a second, and for the first time, Parker Sloan, the CEO, looked up from his phone. Lyle Conrad, the CFO, leaned back with a smirk. I advanced to the next slide: architecture diagrams, performance metrics, cost savings projections. I explained how the system predicted failures before they happened, preventing costly downtime. My heart raced, but my voice was steady. This was my life's work. The product of 18 months of late nights and weekends, mostly on my own equipment at home. I reached the final slide. With the board's approval, I'd like to lead the implementation team and propose a profit-sharing agreement for the system I developed independently. Lyle chuckled. It wasn't the polite kind of laugh, it was sharp, dismissive, slicing through the air. Brilliant engineers aren't leaders. Daphne, we need someone who can talk to investors, not someone who lives in server rooms. I felt my stomach tighten, but I forced myself to stand tall. I built this system. I know every line, every process. I can take it to market faster than anyone else. Parker finally spoke, his tone smooth but cold. Everything you create here belongs to Meridian. It's standard policy. You know that. I looked around the table. Diana from operations avoided my gaze. No one defended me. 8 years of loyalty. Countless nights spent saving this company, and all I got was a smirk and a lecture on my place. My fingers brushed the edge of the table as I gathered my papers. "Thank you for clarifying," I said quietly. My voice was calm, but inside, something fractured. I walked out of the boardroom, each step heavier than the last, thinking only one thing: they had made their choice. Now I would make mine. Rain traced silver lines across my windshield as I drove through San Diego's gaslit streets. Neon signs bled color into the wet asphalt, blurring like watercolor through tired eyes. The hum of the engine and the steady patter of rain were the only sounds. But inside my chest, there was a thrum anger sharpened into clarity. By the time I reached my apartment, the anger had crystallized into a decision. I peeled off my damp jacket, dropped my laptop bag on the floor, and turned my one-bedroom apartment into something else entirely. My dining table became a command center. Whiteboards leaned against the wall, soon covered with architecture diagrams, predictive modeling charts, and timelines. 3 monitors lit the room with a soft blue glow. I opened my personal laptop, my real workstation, and encrypted every folder, every line of code I had built for the system they'd dismissed in the quiet of the night. I could almost hear the hum of potential around me. My fingers moved with certainty. At 2:47 a.m., the Missouri Secretary of State's website flashed a confirmation Vance Neural Systems, LLC, was officially registered. The name felt like a promise whispered in the dark. I opened my notebook and wrote a single sentence, the ink soaking slowly into the page. They laughed. I'll teach them to listen. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the words until they blurred. A memory slipped in me at 10 years old, tinkering with a broken radio in my father's garage while the rest of the world ignored me. I'd always been the quiet one, the girl who solved problems no one noticed until something broke. Being invisible had become second nature, but invisibility could be a weapon, too. I walked to the window and watched the rain ease into mist over the city skyline. Somewhere downtown, Parker and Lyle were probably sleeping soundly, unaware that the foundation of their empire had just shifted. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and whiteboard ink. It no longer felt like home. It felt like a launch pad. By dawn, I already knew what the first step of my new life would be. By day, I became the version of myself they expected: quiet, reliable, and invisible. I arrived at Meridian every morning with a polite smile, nodded through meetings, and fixed small bugs without being asked. When Parker praised Bradley's innovative leadership, I clapped along with everyone else. My badge beeped, my emails were prompt, and my voice was soft. No one ever noticed the way my mind was already elsewhere. By night, I lived my true life. My apartment no longer resembled a home. It was a command center. The blinds stayed half closed, city lights slicing through in narrow gold lines that fell across my screens. The glow of 3 monitors painted my walls in shifting shades of blue and green. Whiteboards leaned against every surface, crowded with arrows and notes, fragments of ideas that would form the backbone of my future. I whispered to myself as I typed invisible in daylight, unstoppable at night. The extraction plan was precise. Meridian would receive a fully functional documentation package for their predictive analytics system, a tidy, stripped-down shell that could run basic operations but would collapse under real-world demand. Meanwhile, the true architecture, my masterpiece, was encrypted and replicated across 3 different cloud servers in 3 different states, beyond the reach of anyone at Meridian. Each night, I moved silently between coding and strategy. I spoke with no one about what I was building, not even my oldest friends. The secret was too sharp, too alive to risk. Every click of my keyboard felt like a nail in the coffin of the company that had dismissed me. The dual life became a rhythm, polite smiles under fluorescent lights, then the rush of creation under the soft pulse of city night. I didn't feel tired anymore. I felt electric, like every line of code carried me closer to freedom. One evening, as a new simulation ran flawlessly on Navara, I leaned back in my chair and watched the data flow across the screen like liquid light. I knew then that the real game was only beginning, and my first move had already been made. It was close to midnight when my monitor flashed an unexpected ping, an internal alert about unusual data traffic. My pulse quickened. I had staggered my uploads, masked my movements in routine server calls, but even perfect patterns sometimes drew attention. 10 minutes later, a message appeared on my company laptop: IT security requires your presence in Lab 2 for a routine audit. I wiped my palms on my jeans, locked my apartment, and drove back to the office under a sky so clear it almost mocked my nerves. The building was empty except for the low hum of air conditioning. In Lab 2, 2 security analysts waited, one typing, one watching me closely. "Evening. Miss Alice Sinclair," the taller one said. "We've noticed some unusual traffic originating from your terminal during off hours. Probably nothing, just need to verify." I leaned casually against the workstation, forcing my voice steady. "Sure. I've been running a maintenance script to clean up test data, with all the simulation logs piling up. It can look like heavy activity." He gestured for me to demonstrate. I connected my company laptop to the network and pulled up the script, a harmless piece of code I'd written months ago as a decoy. A few keystrokes later, the console showed background processes cycling, compressing dummy files, moving nothing critical. "See," I said, "keeping my breathing even. Automated cleanup. I schedule it at night to keep performance smooth during the day." They exchanged a look. Then the shorter analyst nodded. "Understood. Thanks for the clarification." I walked out with measured steps, every nerve alive. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face stayed neutral until the elevator doors closed. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding, in the garage. I paused beside my car, the cool night air washing over me. "Not yet." I whispered to the empty concrete. "You don't see me yet." By the time I reached my apartment, adrenaline had burned into determination. My secret life had just brushed against exposure, and instead of fear, it left me sharper. The next move would have to be flawless, because the real test was about to begin. The co-working office in Austin didn't look like the birthplace of a revolution. It smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner, and the desks were cheap laminate. But to me, it felt like the center of the world. My team 5 sharp. Hungry engineers crowded around the table as we prepared for our first live demo with CardioCare hospitals. The system we had spent months refining, Navara, hummed softly on the screen, streams of patient vitals flowing across the interface like rivers of light. I double-checked every connection, every fail-safe, as the hospital's IT director patched into our secure line, going live. He said, the numbers rolled in heart rates, blood pressures, oxygen levels from dozens of ICU patients. I watched for anomalies, and then there it was, a sudden cluster of irregular cardiac signals. Navara flagged it instantly, pulsing a bright red alert across the dashboard. "Bed 14, I said calmly, though my pulse leapt. Through the video feed, I saw nurses rush to the patient's side. Alarms followed, and moments later, a doctor appeared, issuing rapid instructions. The intervention was swift. The crisis had been caught before it became fatal. In the quiet after the storm, the CEO of CardioCare leaned toward the camera, voice almost a whisper. "This will change everything." I muted the mic and let out a slow breath. The weight of 8 invisible years lifting an inch off my chest. My team exchanged stunned smiles, the kind that said we'd just crossed an invisible threshold. Meanwhile, back at Meridian, Bradley was presenting my old system to the board. Word filtered through a former colleague the trial choked under real-world load. Latency spiked, and the demo collapsed. Executives called it a minor optimization issue, but I knew better. They were holding a corpse wearing makeup. That night, our tiny Austin office felt alive with energy. We'd saved a life, proven our vision, and taken the first step into the light. As I watched the data flow across my monitor, I realized the spark had been lit, and the fire could no longer be contained. The first whispers came from a small tech blog buried in a corner of the internet. Early adopters praised Navarra's predictive analytics real-time monitoring that could redefine hospital care. I read it over black coffee in our Austin office, the sunlight slanting through the window. My team was still half asleep, unaware that the first pebble had just started the avalanche. By the end of the week, the whispers turned into a low hum. Industry insiders began connecting dots. CardioCare's sudden operational improvements, a quiet new startup in Austin, and delays at Meridian Technologies. I didn't need to say a word. The code, the results, and the lives saved spoke for themselves. Then the emails leaked. A former colleague sent them to me with no subject line, just an attachment. I clicked through them slowly, my chest tightening and loosening all at once. Parker Sloan. She's technically competent, but forgettable. Lyle Conrad. She'll thank us for the reality check someday. I stared at those words longer than I expected. They didn't sting anymore. They confirmed exactly why I'd left. But beneath the satisfaction, a dull ache settled in. The fallout wasn't just for the arrogant, talented engineers. People who had worked quietly alongside me for years were about to suffer because of decisions they hadn't made. Meridian stock slid 8% in 2 days. Then came the resignations. LinkedIn updates rolled in like quiet funeral bells, seeking new opportunities, open to work. I hesitated, then drafted a single private message to a young engineer I trusted. If you need a place where your work matters, call me. The reply came an hour later. Thank you, I think I will. Watching the company that had dismissed me begin to hollow out felt like witnessing gravity take over. I didn't have to push anymore. The collapse had its own momentum. That night, as I powered down my monitors, I knew the walls of Meridian's empire were finally starting to crack, and the people who had once laughed in that boardroom would soon feel the tremor under their feet. The morning sun glinted off the glass door of Vance Neural Systems. My name etched cleanly across it. For the first time in my life, I felt ownership in every sense of the word. Inside. The hum of keyboards and quiet voices filled the air. My team worked with the kind of focus that only comes from knowing your work matters. Around 10, a black town car pulled up outside. I watched through the glass as Parker Sloan, Lyle Conrad, and a board member I recognized from the annual report stepped out, their polished shoes clicking on the sidewalk. The Austin heat wrapped around them instantly, and by the time they reached the door, sweat already darkened their collars. "Daphne," Parker said, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for seeing us on short notice." I led them into the conference room, sunlight spilling across the table I'd bought secondhand. No catered lunches, no glass awards, just whiteboards and code prints pinned to the walls. Lyle leaned forward first. "We'd like to discuss options. CEO position, a directorship, licensing agreements, or, if you're open to it, a full acquisition." I let the silence stretch, letting them feel the hum of the servers behind the walls. Their eyes flicked around, taking in the reality of what I had built without them. Finally, I spoke, my voice even. You had me for 8 years. That offer expired in your boardroom." Parker's jaw tightened. Lyle shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The board member muttered something about regrettable decisions, but I was already standing, guiding them to the door. The heat outside hit them like a wall, and I watched through the glass as they crossed the sidewalk back to their car, their expensive suits clinging in the Texas sun. I turned back to my office, the hum of my team's quiet work greeting me again. The visit had changed nothing, except for one truth settling deeper into my bones. The future no longer belonged to Meridian, and they knew it. The first time I saw my name in the tech press, I had to read the headline twice, "The engineer who refused to stay invisible." The article painted a quiet rebellion, a story of someone who turned rejection into innovation. It felt strange seeing my life distilled into a headline, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like I had finally stepped into the light I'd been working toward for years. Meanwhile, Meridian was bleeding. Their stock slid week after week, and news of mass layoffs hit the industry feeds, 40% of their staff gone in 3 months. The same board that once dismissed me as not leadership material now scrambled to keep their sinking ship afloat. Resumes began landing in my inbox, some from engineers I'd mentored, others from names I remembered only as quiet faces in cubicles. I brought them in, one by one, sitting across simple desks in our Austin office. I didn't ask for loyalty. I asked them what they wanted to build, what kind of work would make them proud again. Soon, our office thrummed with a different energy than any company I'd ever known. There was laughter between code reviews, sketches of new interface designs taped to the walls, late-night takeout on whiteboards covered in equations. I looked around one evening and realized this was the victory I wanted, not their collapse, but our creation. During a team huddle, I said it aloud for the first time. "We're not here to destroy. We're here to build what they never could." Heads nodded. Eyes lit up. The satisfaction didn't come from watching Meridian fall. It came from knowing we were shaping something real, something alive. The skyline outside our windows glowed with the fading sun, and I felt the momentum shifting completely. Meridian was a shadow of its former self, and our world was just beginning to expand. I closed my laptop that night knowing the next step would define not just our company, but my legacy. Months slipped by, and Navarra 2.0 became the name whispered in every hospital corridor and tech conference keynote. Our platform was now the industry standard, saving lives with every early alert, turning raw data into hope. The updates rolled out seamlessly, each one sharper and faster than the last. Hospitals reported fewer emergencies, faster responses, and even insurance providers started calling us first. Meanwhile, Meridian faded into the background like a company that had never mattered. Their remaining assets were sold off quietly, a footnote in the business pages. No triumphant headlines, no statements from Parker Sloan or Lyle Conrad, just the quiet acknowledgement that the empire they'd guarded with arrogance had slipped through their fingers. One Tuesday morning, after a call with Phoenix Care about expanding nationwide coverage, I checked my inbox and saw an email with the subject line, "Thank you. My boss said my ideas were too ambitious. Your story showed me I don't have to stay invisible." I read it twice, then a third time, letting the words settle into me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It hadn't been for a while. This was the part that mattered, the ripple I hadn't expected. I opened a folder on my desktop labeled "Why This Matters" and filed the email there. Dozens of messages lived in that folder now, from engineers, nurses, and even a hospital administrator who said Navarra caught the warning signs that saved his own father. I glanced up at the whiteboard in my office, where new architecture diagrams sprawled across it, ideas for what Navarra 3.0 might become. My team's laughter echoed from the next room, the hum of our servers a constant heartbeat in the background. I smiled, picked up a marker, and turned back to the board. I wasn't their kind of leader. I became something else, someone who builds empires quietly, until the world has no choice but to listen.